Hello, welcome back. Today we read chapter 7, which was called Organized Planning. I'm really glad I started taking notes because this chapter was incredibly long. It was like 60 pages and it was kind of technical and it got lots of bullet points and listings and blah, 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 blah. So I was actually really excited to read tonight, and then I started reading and it seemed like I was reading forever. So I did lose track a little bit. I kind of was zoning out for a little bit during reading this chapter. So, again, I'm glad I took notes. So here's kind of the breakdown of the chapter as I saw it. So basically, this chapter was about how to start the process to accumulating riches. So previous chapters talked about desire and imagination and forming these plans, and this actually started talking about more of the process and kind of the aspects that are required to being a good leader. And again, he talked about selling personal services, and I'm kind of getting the understanding that selling personal services is just basically selling yourself as a employee or potential employee, or even selling yourself to potential customers if you were to start your own business. So try to keep this as concise as possible, but it's probably going to go a little long because there's a lot of information that was covered, so bear with me. So the first step that he talked about was forming a mastermind group when you are deciding on a plan. And basically the mastermind group is people who have knowledge that you think that you can benefit from in whatever business idea that you choose to undertake. Sorry, there's my phone going off. And basically, he says, get as many people as you need to have all the knowledge or all the access to the knowledge that you might need. So, I imagine today, compared to when he was around, the Napoleon Hill is talking about the time of this book, you probably need smaller mastermind groups because of the availability of the internet and the widespread availability of knowledge. So these mastermind groups might not be quite as important, but I still think that there's probably a benefit to having a knowledgeable and accomplished team around you. So there's that. And then he kind of talks about the quote, "Winners never quit and quitters never win." So he really is kind of hammering home the idea that when you start and you start your plot to grow with riches, it's really important to start with a plan, test the plan. If it doesn't work, devise a new plan, and don't give up until you find a plan that does work, because no one who's successful gives up on their plan. Ultimately, they're the ones who are able to devise multiple plans and eventually be successful with that plan. The ones who are deemed failures are the ones who try multiple plans and finally say, you know what, it's not going to work, I give up. Then he talks about the effective traits of leadership, and there was a lot of points and bullet points to this. What I kind of got out of this and was interesting, I started, this will be a book that I read in later editions of A Chapter a Day with Jeff. But there's a book called Good to Great by Jim Collins. I read about half of it last year and I gave up on it, like I mentioned in the introduction. But what some of the effective traits of leadership that he talks about in this book are similar to what they cover in Good to Great, and they call it the window and mirror phenomenon. So, a good leader, when there's something that goes wrong, they look in the mirror and they see what they did and they take accountability for when something goes wrong. So, they're the ones at fault and they're willing to take the blame for when something goes wrong. But when something goes right, they're happy to look through the window instead of looking in the mirror, and looking in through that window, they are able to give the credit to the people who are working with them or under them, their employees, or the people that are helping them to attain that goal. So it's kind of an interesting aspect they talked about in this book, that good leaders take the blame for when things go wrong and give the credit for when things go right. So that seems to be something that's really an overarching theme that hits home with me. Then he talks about the fertile fields for leadership, and it's interesting because he's in 1937 writing this book, and the fields that he talks about are so similar to what we would think have good opportunity for new forms of leadership today. So the ones that he talks about are politics. I mean, our country has been in political turmoil for forever now. Today happens to be the inauguration of Joe Biden, so interesting transition there. I don't know what your opinions are on that, but certainly a new opportunity for leadership in politics. The field of banking he talks about, and I think that's another interesting thing today. I follow cryptocurrency a little bit, not a ton, but I think there's this general distrust in the centralized banking system. And that's why we're seeing such a huge explosion in the cryptocurrency world. So there's certainly opportunity for leadership in the banking industry today as well. And he talks about industry, so like car industry, blah blah blah. I don't know as much about that, so I won't comment on that too much. Then religion. I mean, I think we're seeing a lot of opportunity for leadership in religion, or just a lot of people who are kind of deviating from religion in general, like myself. So then he talks about the opportunity in journalism and media. I think this is huge because we see. I mean, it's been the fake news era, right, where we have more distrust in media and all sources of media, and there's these polarizing sides of media where we have CNN over here and we have Fox News over here, and where's the middle ground, right? And I think that's we still have huge opportunity for leadership in journalism and media in someone who serves the public and not serves sponsors and payer sources and things like that. So that's what he talks about in there. And then lastly, we have education, and he mentions the opportunity for leadership in education is in the process of more practical education, less on knowledge, less on foundational stuff, less on theory, and more on applying education. And I think that's something that we're seeing a lot more. The value of college education has declined over time because people are looking to do instead of just learning and knowing. So interesting in that regard. Um, then he talks about kind of selling yourself. Um, and selling your personal services again. It talks about that. This doesn't really hit home with me quite as much, but when I was reading this portion, I was thinking about how many similarities there are in this to selling a service and marketing in general. So I have a mobile physical therapy practice, and I sell a service. I sell my medical services as a physical therapy provider, as a doctor of physical therapy, and it's no different than selling anything else. And I think that some of the points that he went over in this section really resonated with me because selling yourself in a personal service is no different than selling medical care in my position, right? So interesting points that he made there. Then he talks about how jobs are becoming less of an employer-employee relationship and more of a partnership. And I think that that is really interesting because we're seeing more of that today. People want skin in the game. Employees want skin in the game. We're more apt to see people who want to have some sort of role as far as an ownership or partnership versus just go in and collect your salary. And I mean, maybe that's just me personally, but I think that that's a more of a predominant trend than we've seen in the past. And I think that he kind of predicted the future very well in this case. And then he talks about how the public is the new employer, and so much of industry and so much of fields are geared towards serving the public. And he uses the example that industries that used to be kind of rude to the public and not very service minded towards the public, like train stations and travel cars and things like that, where you just expect rudeness in service, those have gone by the wayside. And I think we're seeing that even more with the Amazon of the world and the Chick-fil-A's of the world, where these businesses who really focus on delivering high quality service to the public are the ones who are exploding and really making huge steps towards riches and dominance in their industry. So kind of interesting there. So a lot of his predictions are just kind of right on point as far as what he covered in this book. Then he talks about how the Great Depression, which they just recovered from at this time when he's writing the book, was due, at least in part, to reaping without sowing. And the old biblical phrase that we reap what we sow um, is so true. And he thinks that he postulates that this depression was caused by basically taking more than people earned for a long period of time until eventually it caught up with them, and they were reaping more than they were sowing, and as a result, everything kind of fell down on their heads. So he really emphasizes how important it is to reap to sow before you reap, right? So making sure that you're putting in the work and you are proving the value for whatever it is you're selling or whatever it is you're collecting, and actually delivering on value. Then he talks about the QQS rating. I'm going to kind of hurry up here. We're already at 10 minutes, so I'm going to speed things up. QQS rating is basically how you can quantify value for whatever industry you're in or whatever service you're providing or good you're providing, commodity, and it's quality plus quantity plus spirit. So I think that's something that a lot of us neglect is we. For example, I've run physical therapy clinics in the past, and I look at PTs that have worked under me, and I usually just grade them by quality and quantity, right? So, are they providing high quality healthcare? And are they seeing enough patients? And that's really the only two qualifying factors for people to keep their job. But what he talks about and he says is the most important aspect, and as talked about by Andrew Carnegie, who was the man, the steel guy, is delivering it with spirit. And without spirit, you could have all the quality and quantity in the world, and if you don't deliver it with a spirit and enthusiasm, then you are not a valuable asset or a valuable employee to your organization. So something good worth considering. Then he talks about how your capital worth is your annual income times 16 and 2/3. I don't know what the hell that means, like at all. So that didn't hit home with me at all. I have no idea what he's talking about on that. If any of you guys do, please reach out. Then he goes over the 30 major causes of failure. I made a couple quick notes about these. Again, I'm trying to hurry up here, but some of the major ones that hit home with me: lack of a well-defined purpose in life. That's something that I've struggled with. I mean, I have a high level of education, and I generally enjoy what I do most days, but I still struggle with finding my purpose and if knowing if I'm on the right track. So I think that's something that might be contributing to. I wouldn't call myself a failure, but I guess that in my standards, by my standards, I would be a failure right now, and that's probably something that's contributing to it for me. Then there's lack of self-discipline. Another thing that I know that myself and probably everybody struggles with to some extent is doing the things that I say I'm going to do and staying committed to the tasks that I want to be committed to, and really keeping promises to myself more than anything else, being accountable to myself. So lack of self-discipline is a big thing for everybody and definitely big for me. Interesting one that I've seen and seen huge benefits from, anecdotally over the past, I would say, 10 years of my life is the wrong selection of a mate in marriage. And that's interesting. I've never been married, but I've dated, I've been in many serious relationships, and I've always struggled with taking the steps towards doing what I know I need to do and being the person that I want to become ultimately. And the consistent, persistent pursuit of my passion and of what I want to do. And right now, I'm incredibly fortunate and grateful and can say that I have found the right person for me. And I know that that has been a huge, without getting too sentimental, it's been a huge driving force in my life is that I've surrounded myself with the right person and I have the right mate in my life that supports me. And I feel more free at this time in my life to take the steps towards my own personal and financial and business success than I ever have in my life. And I know a huge factor of that is who I've decided to spend my life with. So, something that definitely can't be overlooked, and I've never realized how important that is and how much previous relationships have probably held me back until recently. Um, Another aspect of failure, contributed to failure, is overcaution. So not taking the chances that you know you need to take because there is a risk involved. So being overly cautious will lead you to failure. And then lack of concentration. And I think that's a big one for a lot of people, myself included. And as the saying goes, jack of all trades, master of none. That's a dangerous trap that people get into is they want to learn a little bit about a lot instead of learning a lot about a little bit. So another common saying is dig a hole an inch wide, a mile deep instead of an inch deep, a mile wide. So that's how you're going to become an expert of something. And then the last one that I made note of is a lack of capital. Is something that I've perfectly demonstrated recently, even when I first started out in business. I didn't have a lot of money put away. I invested a little bit to get the business started, and I was desperate, because I needed money to survive and not just to run a business or to build a business, but I needed money to survive. And it made me force decisions that I probably wouldn't have made in the past and really try to over pressure patients into becoming my customers, so to speak. And it really ended up working out against me. And I think there's two good sayings that go along with this, two good quotes. And one of them is from a book that I recently read part of, noticing a theme here, and it is called Think Like a Rocket Scientist. And they talk about digging the well before you're thirsty, right? So make sure that you have a little bit of money set aside before you need the money. And don't, it's harder to make money when you need money than it is to make money when you are following a definite plan, as talked about in this. And then another good saying to go along with this is don't go to the grocery store when you're hungry, right? It's harder to shop for the things you need and to fulfill your purpose at the grocery store when you're already hungry versus when you're full. So same thing goes with starting a business when you have some capital versus when you are just dirt poor. Um, Kind of funny, he finishes with number 31 of the list of things that can contribute to failure is he just says, under this, name any cause of failure which you've experienced. So it's like, hey, fill in the blank here. Here's number 31 for you. Whatever you want to put here, go ahead and put it there. Kind of a cop out in my idea again. But then he goes into an inventory of the self, which is really kind of a cool little 28 list of questions that you can do a quick inventory of yourself and kind of get an idea of what might be standing in your way towards success and what might predispose you to failure. Um, One of the things I got out of this was Dave Meltzer. I know I've mentioned him previously. He talks about waking up with the 100/20 rule in mind. And that's basically, he wakes up in the morning and he says that he wants to go out into the world and give away $100 bills and ask for 20 in return. And by that, he means he wants to provide $100 worth of value to his potential client, customer, patient, whatever it is, and all he's asking for is 20 in return. So he wants to over deliver and kind of under ask for compensation, right? And that's a good path to riches, is over delivering in quality and quantity and spirit, right? Then he goes into talking about the freedom and opportunities in the U.S. You could tell the sign of the times again. He talks about how two people in New York can get a big, huge breakfast for 10 cents each, which will never happen ever again. And then he talks about how shelter in New York City is $65 a month for like a nice apartment or whatever. Not even close anymore, obviously. But he talks about how these opportunities that we have in the U.S. that we take for granted are formed by capitalism and organized capital that bring these opportunities together. And he basically defends capitalism for the last portion of this chapter. So really long chapter, really long video here. I tried to go through it as quickly as possible. I enjoyed it for the most part. I just found myself drifting and kind of losing interest at times. But this will definitely be a chapter that I return to after I finish reading the book and kind of going over it a little bit more and definitely going through that inventory of self and seeing which boxes I check and which ones I don't. So would encourage you to do the same. Tomorrow we'll read chapter 8, hopefully not quite as long. Haven't looked at it yet, so hopefully you join me there, and if you survive to the end of this video, more power to you. We'll see you tomorrow. Thanks.